Today we're going to talk Nikon. I'm really excited to do this video today because Nikon just announced a new camera, the D780, which is a successor to the D750, which I have been shooting with since it came out almost, I don't know, it's getting close to almost 6 years ago now. I bought it right after it came out. I traded in my D600, and this has been my primary camera for the last 6 years. There are a lot of things I love about the D750. It's a perfect size. It's got a nice deep grip. It's got 2 memory card slots. It's a 24 megapixel sensor, so the files aren't too huge. They're very easy to work with. Great dynamic range, the tilting screen that I love. So there's a lot of things about this camera that I really love. But one of the things that I didn't love about this camera was the autofocus for video. It's actually horrible. I did a video about it. So before I get into this video and talk to you about, am I switching cameras, what am I doing, let's just enjoy Nikon's autofocus for video. Isn't it lovely? Isn't this great? This is one of the most frustrating things about owning a Nikon DSLR. And it was one of the main driving factors of why I bought the Canon M50, which I'm shooting on right now. So I could sit here, do these types of videos, I can see myself in the screen, and I don't have to worry about autofocus. It tracks my face and it's fine. If I move in, I'm in focus. If I move out, I'm in focus. The Nikon just was terrible at video. So now with the D780, Nikon has rectified some of these problems and not rectified some of these problems. And there's also another issue, that it's a direct competitor to the Z6. They are similar in price. They share a sensor that's almost identical. And they have a lot of the same features. And I'm not sure what Nikon's thought process is here. Obviously, they know they have a lot of DSLR shooters who are not ready to switch to mirrorless yet, and this camera is, for them. I'm one of those shooters. I have a DSLR. The Z6 and 7 came out, didn't really give me everything that I wanted, so I'm kind of hanging on to my D750 to see what is next. So the D780 really it's an interesting camera for me. So I'm going to talk about that today. The first thing, I just want to do a shout out to my friend Morty at Westbury Camera again. Here's my SB700 flash that's been sitting in my bag for 2 years dead. Wouldn't work. It wasn't an expensive flash, but if you saw my video, I'll link it here, where I brought my, actually this lens right here, the Nikon 28-70 that I have in my camera. He fixed that for me. And I said, you know what, I wonder if there's any other gear that I, have sitting around that maybe could be fixed. So for less than $50, I got my flash working again. Yeah, so I'm going to drop a link for him. If you have any old gear that you're interested in maybe getting fixed, it doesn't matter where you live. You can send it to him. He'll give you an estimate. I'm just so thrilled that I found him. Okay, so let's talk about these two cameras now. The D780 and the Z6 are cameras in that $1,500 to $2,200 price point, depending on when you order them, the holidays, if they're running specials, if you get it with or without an adapter. So what's the difference between these two cameras? Because if you're like me, you might be sitting with a D750, or maybe you have a crop sensor camera, maybe a D7500, or you're just getting into photography and you want to get your first full frame camera. There are some differences that are more glaring than others, and one of them that we start with is the ergonomics. The D780 is going to be like a DSLR. It's going to be big. It's going to be heavy. This is a heavy camera in my hand. I've held the Z6 and Z7. I've shot with them a little bit. They are both a little bit smaller, still have a good feel, have a nice deep grip, but they are smaller. So that's one thing you're going to have to feel for yourself. Now these cameras, when you're lugging them around all day, or if you're shooting professionally, you have to decide, is that little bit of weight difference going to matter to you? For me, it really doesn't. I'm a bigger guy. I'm 6'3". It's not a big deal. I like having a big camera in my hand. When I use the M50, it feels very small in my hand, and I like the heft of a DSLR. Another big issue, and if you've been watching the channel, you know it's an issue for me, is that the Z6 has 1 memory card slot. The new D780 has 2. Now, I know a lot of people don't care about this, and Eric actually got rid of his 5D Mark IV that had 2 slots and went with the Canon R that has 1. And Eric has actually had a card failure where he lost half of the images on a trip that he was on, and he's willing to take that chance. So that's something that you're going to have to decide. It depends what you're doing. If you're a casual shooter doing family vacations and you're just a hobbyist, that could be fine. If you get paid to shoot, I think it's important to have a backup. So that's something that you're going to have to decide for yourself, but that's one of the big differences. One of the things I like about the D780 and the Z6 actually, compared to the D750, is that the shutter speed, the maximum shutter speed, is 1/8,000th of a second instead of 1/4,000th of a second. And that gives you a little more room on bright sunny days to try to, work within the light you're dealt with, instead of having to use filters to block out some of the light if you need to knock down your shutter speed for whatever reason. You don't want to overexpose images. It'll be nice to have that little bit of extra room to move. So if you're going from a D750 to a D780, that's something that might be important to you. And I know that's something that if I was going to buy either of these cameras, I'd appreciate having. Okay, the sensors are very similar in these. They look almost identical when you look at them on paper. There's some small differences, but I think for the most part, the specs are very, very similar. And I think you can get the same kind of performance out of both of them. And from my friends that own the Z6, they've told me that the dynamic range is great, and the Z6 is really good in low light situations and high ISO situations. So that's something that you can look forward to on either of these cameras. Now, there are some differences with the autofocusing systems. So the Z6 is a mirrorless camera and it has an electronic viewfinder, and you're using the entire frame to autofocus, and it's a touch screen on the back, and it has eye tracking, and it doesn't matter in what mode you use the camera in. This is the autofocus system. It's a mirrorless autofocus system. Very good, very fast focusing. I was playing around at the Photo Plus Expo with the eye tracking autofocus, and it's pretty great. So that's one of the things that I really like about the Z6 and 7, is that the autofocus is fantastic for stills and for video. So you have really good video autofocus, which is something that my D750 does not have, and most Nikon DSLRs hadn't for a long time. The difference here is that when you buy the D780, if you use the optical viewfinder, which the Z6 doesn't have, is an electronic viewfinder, the optical viewfinder, you're shooting with basically the old style autofocus setup. You're going to have that like kind of clumped in the middle look where you have the focus points kind of in the middle of your viewfinder, as opposed to a mirrorless camera where they're going to be the entire frame of view. So you can touch anywhere on the screen and it'll focus there. You might have to move and recompose when you're shooting with the D780 up to your eye through the viewfinder. However, if you want to use the D780 in what really is a mirrorless camera mode, you can use the live view function. You have the ability to autofocus throughout the whole screen with a phase detect autofocusing system. And this is going to greatly improve the autofocus, especially for video, and also your stills. You're not going to have to focus and recompose as you would if you were looking through the optical viewfinder. So this is a huge reason why the D780 is attractive to me as a replacement for my D750. Now my D750 is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I love it, but I really don't use it for video ever. I would love to have one camera system. I would love to get rid of all the Canon M50 stuff and just have one camera, one set of lenses that I can use for everything. And Nikon is getting closer to being there. Not quite there yet, and I'll tell you why. The screen in the back still doesn't flip out. And it moves up and down, but it still does not swing around so you can actually see yourself. So right here, I sat down and I looked in the screen, I framed myself, I have a little bit of room on the top of my head, I can see where I'm at. It's just convenient. So for my purposes, something like this is something that I wish Nikon would just do. Could I get around it? Absolutely. I could shoot wide and then crop in, and it's not a problem. And so knowing that I have the ability to use the D780 like that is very attractive to me, and still have some of the functions of a mirrorless camera, the dual memory card slots, and the heft of a DSLR. That's for me. Other people like the small size of a mirrorless camera. They like the ability to get new lenses. The Z-mount lenses are supposed to be very nice lenses. It's just a different experience shooting with a mirrorless camera. Using the electronic viewfinder, you can see live exposures in your viewfinder when you actually have the camera up to your eye. With an optical viewfinder, it's a traditional DSLR, so you're just looking through a pentaprism and you're seeing what it sees. You don't see your exposure in the viewfinder. And there's one more big difference between these two camera bodies. The Z6 and 7 have in-body 5-axis image stabilization, where the D780 does not. So this is a big difference, and my friends that own these cameras say that it's really great. The image stabilization is amazing. With the D750 and the D780, your lens is going to have image stabilization. What's great about the Z6 that it's built in. Now I own quite a few lenses that don't have image stabilization, like this one right here. This is an older lens. It's a 28-70. I just had it repaired. One of my favorite lenses that I've had for a long time. This lens doesn't have image stabilization. My new Tamron 28-70 does. Would I love for this lens to have it inside? I sure would, and it's one of the reasons why I'd consider selling this lens and keeping my Tamron. But if I bought the Z6, maybe I'd keep this lens because I prefer the bokeh that it has, and it's just one of those classic old lenses that I just really like. Having in-body stabilization is something that might be super important to someone, especially if you shoot in low light. I could see this being great for a sports shooter who shoots in indoor venues or weddings or parties. If you shoot any kind of parties and catering halls and things like that, I could see stabilization like this really coming in handy. So that's a big factor between these two. One has it, one doesn't. So the last difference is the big one that a lot of people look at right away, and that's the price. Is it worth an extra $400 and something to get the D780 for an extra memory card slot, basically? I'm not sure. I don't know. For some people it might be. It depends what you prefer. With the Z6 and 7, if you buy it with the adapter, it's $1,800, and you can use all of your old Nikon lenses and still have the ability to buy into the new Z-mount lens system as it gets fleshed out over the next few years. And that might be very attractive to some people. I know Eric is loving getting these new Canon R lenses. And if you've seen any of his videos about these lenses, they are amazingly sharp, and they just have some really cool, tech-forward features. And I really like where cameras are going with all of this stuff. So I'm hoping Nikon does the same types of things with the Z-mount. Now, if I buy the D780, I don't think I will be able to use those Z-mount lenses. I'm not sure if they're going to do some sort of reverse adapter or if they even have something like that out right now. I don't think they do. But if you buy the Z6 and 7, that's not a problem. You can bring all your old lenses with you as well as whatever Nikon comes out with for less money. So what do you think? Do you own the Z6 and 7? Do you love it? I would love to know, because I am the guy that Nikon built the D780 for. I am a D750 shooter. I don't need the megapixels and the size of a D850. I'm not looking for a big heavy camera like that. This is like my sweet spot for a camera. I really think this is one of the best all-around cameras out there for photography. I'm hoping the next versions of the Z6 and 7 will have some sort of dual memory card, or they can figure out a way to flip the screen around and make it a little more of what I'm looking for. But if not, at least I have an option now as a Nikon shooter. Eric and I are heading out today. As you're watching this, we're heading into upstate New York to the Finger Lakes region. We're going to do some winter shooting. We're going to see what we find up there. It's a beautiful region, waterfalls, and we've never gone up at this time of year. Unfortunately, believe it or not, there's no snow in upstate New York in the mountains because it's been warm. It was last week. I'm shooting this in the middle of January. It was 70 degrees here on Long Island on Sunday, which is insane. So we're going up there. We were hoping to get some maybe ice waterfalls and things like that. It's not going to happen, but we're still going to go up there. It's good to get away, get some shooting in and see how it goes. So I'm sure we'll take some videos and talk about some landscape photography and actually the nuts and bolts of shooting, because I think all this gear talk is great, but when you get up there and you're out in the field, that's when you get confused, when you're staring at your camera, you're like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? So we'll do a couple of tutorials, especially on landscape photography, because it's one of our favorite types of photography. It's a very soothing and relaxing way to shoot, and we really enjoy it. So look for those videos coming up in the next few weeks. Okay, see you in the next one.